Hello and welcome to No Nonsense with Pamela Wallin. China is the most persistent and sophisticated threat to Canada and our democracy, so says Justice Og, who is conducting the foreign interference inquiry. Government, of course, has now introduced a bill to update some of the laws to try and deal with these kinds of issues of foreign interference, but we are a little late to the game. We're going to have a conversation today with Sam Cooper. He is an investigative journalist, author, the founder of thebureau.news on Substack, which launched about a year ago. His focus has long been, when he was a print reporter and with Global, China's clandestine activities here in Canada. He also wrote a book called Willful Blindness, first published in 2021, looking at the links between money laundering in Canada and Chinese organized crime. But he also says Canada has turned a blind eye to foreign interference in politics and business. So Sam, welcome. When I look at you, and I guess it's my age and stage too, I think you're a young guy to have taken on this issue, and you've been on it for a very long time. What brought you to the table?
Well, first, it's an honor to talk with you, someone in the Senate and a great journalist. What brought me to this was really growing up, that is, starting my journalism career in Vancouver and being, a young family guy. I think I had the motivation and the insight that a lot of my generation just could not get a foothold in that city. And so I started to investigate the real estate issues. And very quickly that led me to issues that Canadian police and intelligence knew pretty well, but the public didn't understand. And that is just a flood of money coming in through Asia-Pacific trade. And I discovered that a lot of that money was murky, if not mysterious, and even criminal, related to very powerful people in Hong Kong and China. And so, as I followed that path on real estate, ultimately I came into, the discovery that West Coast Canada casinos, government regulated, government owned, were being used, at scale. We're talking billions of dollars by Chinese transnational crime with connections to real estate, deep connections that had been there since the 90s. And so ultimately this leads to the shocking, discovery, and it was shocking for me to report it. It's shocking for people to read it, that at the top level, the Chinese Communist Party does have linkages to these illicit financial networks. And at the end of the day, it's strategic. And so this shocks people in Canada, but it's now recognized by the US State Department. It's being stated openly. And I was stating it 4 or 5 years ago, which definitely caught attention and caught a lot of backlash.
Well, we all remember with the handover of Hong Kong that people's money, the Hong Kong money, was coming to Canada, particularly in huge numbers. I had friends that lived in Vancouver that would point out a condo building to me and say, there's 20 empty floors there and one young kid going to university, that it was a place to park money and keep it safe. But that is technically, that's legal on some level, except if there's municipal laws that say you can't have empty apartments. But you're saying it just ran way deeper.
It ran deeper. It wasn't just about empty condos or university students sort of coming to UBC or Simon Fraser University as more or less sort of a front for their parents' money coming in. That was happening. But what I found was not just empty condos, units. We're talking about whole hog condos being developed by people that, CSIS and the RCMP knew behind closed doors had deep connections to the Chinese state, right? And so what's discovered and what I found was really, sort of shoved under the rug in Ottawa was that at a high level, these industrialists and tycoons with connections to Hong Kong, Macau, and China are unfortunately used and tasked by the Chinese state to I can't say it another way, basically to corrupt Western politicians. And so when you start to uncover that kind of stuff and make those kind of allegations that your sources are telling you are true and you can find in documents, I think quickly you're gonna ruffle feathers in Ottawa of the type that, Richard Fadden was only starting to ruffle feathers in 2010 and he got a big backlash.
Well, that's what I was going to say. That was, of course, in an earlier government. Richard Fadden was warning then through CSIS. He was the director of CSIS that politicians were being not only threatened but used, and then we can get into the question of whether some of them were volunteering to be used. But he was pretty much smacked down at that point and said, we don't want to discuss this. And we've had that same mindset continue on, which is, nothing to see here.
Absolutely. And, I tell people that I never set out to be a bureaucrat or an intelligence official or a lawyer or a police officer, but my work takes me into those areas. And I do think, I think I can directly say that Richard Fadden getting the smackdown in 2010, people saying it's anti-Asian racism to raise the question of whether our politicians are getting too close to foreign governments. He really he was silenced. And then I believe that directly leads to people in government realizing that I'm reporting on the same issues. And so people start to think, Canada's in deep danger. Do I need to leak to a journalist that gets the issue and help, the Fourth Estate, expose these issues for Canadian citizens that should be informed, right? And so I do that. And I believe that I get the same sort of, in a way, the same sort of treatment from probably politicians, bureaucrats, and I think at the end of the day, industrialists that maybe have something to hide or don't want the public to quite understand, in ways that mutual benefits that have occurred.
Did you understand, and it's kind of a two-part question, but the personal risk that you might be under, even the things we've seen now with intimidation of political figures and their families back at home and intimidation of the diaspora communities. I mean, you're a young journalist. Is somebody saying to you, I know where you live and where your kids go to school?
Yeah, I'll take your question in two parts with my answer. It starts in Vancouver when I'm really digging into these casino and real estate networks that were, recognized journalistically by myself, but had been known by the government since the 90s. Once I start exposing that, I start to hear from people in government saying, you should take some precautions. These people are not only involved in intelligence agencies and crime networks, but they're dangerous and they will target Canadians. But unfortunately, Pamela, and this is what shocked me, they'll target with violence and threats mostly, the Chinese diaspora, because, it's strangely sort of anti-racist or racist. They felt, okay to do that. But I think I changed the game a bit, and it's just crazy to think about. But yes, I became a person that was so involved with the diaspora that I was told directly by Canadian intelligence and police, there's concerns in China that you may be, maybe Falun Gong is paying you to write, or you may be so close to the truth within, the diaspora sources that they're now seeing you as a direct threat, and you do need to take some precautions and concerns. So the second part of my answer is yes, indeed. Just like Michael Chan or Kenny Chu, I too have been briefed by CSIS that Chinese actors are dangerous in Canada, and they've taken a dangerous interest in myself. So yes, I did take some precautions.
The flip side of that, and we've seen this happen, and it's also like a legitimate point, which is when people leak to a journalist, it's usually because there's a high level of frustration, but they may also have a vested interest. I've seen this just on pure politics. So here's a story about this leader that we're trying to get rid of, and you should know this about him. And if you don't understand the motivation of your sources, you can also be used.
Absolutely. And I'm going to take it in two parts again. As a journalist from a young age, I really didn't like these opposition research stories where just before an election, people would come to you with the stereotypical brown bag with a bunch of slimy allegations. No one's perfect, right? And so, right, they're trying to take down a political rival. And I didn't really like them. I didn't put up my hand when those brown bags came in. So that's that. I don't like politically motivated, hit pieces, but I will tell people that, I'd say due to my upbringing and, my teaching, now I've been in journalism almost 20 years. As Ernest Hemingway said, you've got to have a real good BS censor and you have to understand your sources, right? And so I tell people that, in this particular story, whether it's money laundering in Vancouver or foreign interference in Ottawa, Toronto, I determined that my sources were Canadian patriots, intellectual people, didn't have any personal career path grudges, and their motivation, I found to a person, I judged was because they felt Canada was under a deep threat. And back to the Dick Fadden story, Canadian intelligence was being silenced and suppressed, they believed. So this was a threat to Canada's democracy. And I judged that these were deeply, people full of integrity and patriotic concern.
One of the things that actually surprised me about Justice Ogue's initial report, kind of round one, and I hadn't thought of it this clearly. I mean, I think of CSIS in the post, barn burning days in Quebec. Those are references people might not understand about the RCMP, but that basically CSIS can't do much if they discover that there's a spy or a cooperating ally in Canada. They can't arrest somebody. They can't throw them out.
Yeah.
Now that's going to change a little bit in the proposed legislation, but it's hard to imagine a spy service that can't do anything.
It really is. And I think this is what, shocked people. And probably a lot of people are still confused. CSIS knows so much. They know what the CIA knows. They know what the FBI knows, the agencies in the United States, especially the FBI, that can crack down on foreign proxies that are used by states like China and Iran. But in Canada, since we don't have, yet a foreign agent registry or all kinds of, tools for CSIS and the RCMP, I can't stress it enough. People would be shocked about how much the RCMP and the CSIS know. I'm afraid about concerning allegations regarding politicians and how little they can do. And so as one of my sources for my very first story back in November 2022, when Global broke the PRC interference story, a source, a former CSIS officer said, hey, under the current laws, it's just CSIS approaching our politicians and saying, hey, be careful out there. Right? They have no tool to actually, deter or in the worst cases, prosecute.
Yeah. And they couldn't really even go to people and say that without government permission. They couldn't. Yeah. That was one of the questions that puzzled me. I mean, if you know that politician X or reporter Y is under threat, go and talk to them and say, look, we can't do much, but you should be aware of this. Even that was risky behavior on CSIS's part.
Absolutely. And it sounds like if we get, the suite of tools or a bill tabled, as Minister LeBlanc has indicated, it looks like CSIS could have more freedom to actually approach people, not just at the federal level, but down to school boards, municipalities, Indigenous band leaders, and say, look, just as an example, these people visiting you up in Nunavut and looking at, resources and being friendly to you have other interests in mind, right? So, yeah, that just a line of communication to actually tell people about threats will be a big deal. But I believe you still need, you need a real deterrent, and that means that if people, as I found in Taiwan, if you are found to be taking cryptocurrency or cash from Beijing to interfere in an election, you can go to jail. And at the end of the day, I think that's what we need in Canada.
Need to do. It was interesting. One of the ministers in the initial response to all this discussion said, but we were focused on Russia because, of course, everybody in the US was talking about Russia and Trump, and that turned out to be, at least in part trumped up, and we weren't really even looking at China.
Yeah, and Pamela, because I've looked at this so deeply, I almost just don't buy that excuse because, when I've read the National Security and Intelligence Parliamentarians Panel, that's NSICOP for all the Ottawa insiders, the 2019 report says, hey, CSIS has been consistently warning for years, almost a decade, that China is by far the number one threat. And it's through a very, almost old school human sort of espionage and, pressure and bribery and coercion tactics. Cyber is not the real threat, and Russia's not the real threat, is what CSIS was pounding the table on. And yet we had people, I won't name names, the Privy Council office sort of staff and, the intelligent national security advisors saying, hey, Russia, Russia, Russia. And it's almost, I don't want to say it, but I mean, if they had been listening to the Taiwanese government, they'd understand that our threat in Canada is similar to the threat that Hong Kong, unfortunately, already has fallen to. And that's, Chinese agents in person.
I was just reading a tweet from David Mulrooney, our former ambassador in China, who said, and he's very, very thoughtful on this, that Canada, the government chooses to see China and India through the diaspora prism, and that we always talk about friendship and our multiculturalism and embracing people. And hello, boys and girls, this is about national interest and national security. And we've kind of got to grow up and be less willfully blind, to steal your book title.
No, I totally agree. And I've got a lot of respect for Mr. Mulrooney. He's got such experience. He's seen the threats, firsthand. And I think he made the determination inside, and it can't have been easy, that he was just going to speak very plainly about what he sees as, he uses, naivety, sleepiness, and he'll come out and use the C word, corruption. So I believe, when we're looking at China and India, of course, there's great reasons, to keep those friendly trade channels open. But at the same time, as you say, we have to consider protecting our diasporas, not allowing people to face literal life safety threats. And we've got to, I believe, start being a little less polite Canadian. We have to toughen up and get it. Our, as I say, our internal hockey player. If someone's in our crease hammering the goalie, right, we've got to come out with the cross check, and that's what we haven't done that yet.
When David Vigneault, the current head of CSIS, came back to testify, and this is again the kind of thing that you just go, wow. He said that we are basically seen as a low risk, high reward endeavor, that a lot of the, and every country has foreign operatives and foreign spies. I mean, we're not special in that one, but we're easy because we have that naivete, and we're also a pretty wide open back door to the United States of America.
Absolutely. I think that, people try to understand, why is China picking on us so much? It's because we're an easy target. And at the end of the day, my sources, and I think anyone can see it, we're looking again in the Indo-Pacific. We're getting, unfortunately, close to war, I think. And China, perhaps just as they want to do in the Middle East, hostile states want to divide us from the United States. And I think they're less interested, just like Russia isn't all that interested in Canada. China sees Canada as a stepping stone to their main adversary.
Yeah. Well, not to mention our resources. That's always handy too.
That's true.
I want to know whether you make a distinction or whether it's the same, because, the focus on politicians and trying to intimidate, and obviously having friendly discussions and decisions made about China is their objective. They obviously don't want policies that would make it difficult for them to either access or do business with us. But the other side of it that troubles me, and we've heard this in the commissions, is sort of the elite capture, which includes politicians, but the amount of Chinese dollars in our universities controlling research decisions, fundamental research decisions, and therefore taking intellectual property home is hugely troubling to me and to our country and our economic prospects.
Yeah, I mean, before I even started to get controversially classified information and break these stories that shock Canadians, I was just using open source records to report on how Nortel, strangely, again, this is just, I think Canadians should still be dismayed and shocked
Absolutely.
that, right? We led the world in what is the technology that will lead the world, and we lost our crown jewel, Nortel. And
Ottawa was supposed to be Silicon Valley North with Nortel.
yes, and we almost had the lead in certain areas. We're not dumb people, BlackBerry, Nortel, but we can't hold on to our intellectual property. So when you talk about elite capture, look, I'll give you just a tiny bit of a scoop. I believe the election interference story, that focuses on Toronto,
right.
What I hear from sources, including in the diaspora, is that Chinese intelligence is deeply, invested in Toronto because that's where our industrial base is. They're interested in Montreal because we have all these aerospace companies there. And so when they're trying to get at our politicians, it's not just to, influence them on the genocide in Xinjiang or to shut them up on criticism of human rights abuses. At the end of the day, as you say, they're targeting our elite industrialists. And I mean, look, there's if we're talking about Nortel, you dig into those same networks, and there's people that will allege that executives could have been influenced in the same way that possibly our politicians face these influence operations.
Well, the obvious case that I think shocks everybody, and we still don't really have any serious answers, are the two scientists at the Winnipeg National Microbiology Lab. Why were they there? How did they get to stay so damn long? We didn't really do anything to them except send them home, and we have no idea what they'd been sending and what they took with them.
Yeah, there's so much to that case. I mean, I can say I'm a little bit proud that I got some insight into the US State Department investigation looking at what happened in Wuhan. We still don't have the truth, but as you know, right, circumstantially, there's a lot of people in high places that start to think that it was a lab accident. And I was told by my US State Department sources, flat out, they believed that Winnipeg was used in a Chinese intelligence operation to build up the Wuhan lab's capacity. And these are entities in China that are literally believed by CSIS to be possibly involved in biowarfare. So we haven't even got close to the bottom of. I also tell people, look at the CanSino vaccine case. Canada was in a partnership with a PLA entity to produce a COVID vaccine. And this entity, CanSino, was active in Canada since around 2013, which stuns me. As you say, how could they be involved in our Winnipeg lab? And I say broader across our health system for so long.
Yeah. When the naivete, even the prime minister is supposedly said, the reportage on this, we don't know the actual facts, but he reportedly said in his off the record testimony that, the case of Handong, I mean, he knew there were things, but, they really wanted to win that riding. I mean, when you kind of compare just a political seat here or there versus the threat posed to our economic future in the larger sense of the Chinese coming to take our intellectual property and to coerce people to participate. This is like, it's kind of, we've got the political child's play going on over here, and then the real stuff that has international import.
Yeah, Pamela, I believe that, first of all, I believe that I'm surprised at the level of evidence that has come out in the Hogue Commission. A lot of skeptics thought we wouldn't even get close to the truth. And I credit commission lawyers for
Yeah,
starting to get there. But what I would like to, share with you and your viewers is that I believe if we look at the proxies, that is people close to the Chinese consulate, I'm saying people involved in underground networks in Toronto. These would be, the people that are their names haven't come up, but suspected of helping certain campaigns. Look, you can go into open source records and see these same people involved in so-called Chinese thousand talent stations in Toronto. And Pamela, these would be the very same program that would be
yeah,
involved in the Winnipeg lab case or would be involved in, alleged IP theft from the University of Toronto. So it really does, I think there's a deeper level that certainly hasn't come to the surface yet. And I think that's why I continue to do these stories, because
right.
when you get deep into Chinese intelligence, I'm saying the espionage, the intellectual property, targeting aerospace in Montreal will connect to the same people targeting our politicians.
Just a personal question, if you don't mind, and then we'll come back to the inquiry. I mean, there have been lots of legal battles around this. You're now on your own as one of the modern journalists that does your own work, and you're on Substack, and that's it. It's hard to make a lot of money doing that. As you say, you're a family man. Can you survive and live doing this, given the pressure on you and the players that you're up against?
Okay, I'm going to tackle this in two parts. The first one is family and safety. The second was is economic. So
Yeah,
I have taken the decision that I have, people that are licensed to be let's just say enforcers in Canada that believe in what I'm doing. So if I feel any imminent threats, I'll be warned. I've taken
okay.
security steps. And I'm always watching that. If it becomes too dangerous, I'll have to make the decision that, hey, maybe go back to law school or join a hedge fund as an analyst or something. But Pamela, I really believe that I was raised that you should be interested in public service. And I do deeply believe that these stories I'm reporting, and it's not just going to be China, are important to Canada's democracy. So that's driving me. So let's go to the second part. I mean, I had since publishing my book, it debuted at #1 in
Yeah,
Amazon in Canada. So that gave me the confidence that, this kind of deeply researched, well-written investigative journalism could have a digital platform when it was time to do that. And I got, enough sort of just enough seed money from patriotic supporters. And I'll tell you, completely nonpartisan, that
yeah.
again, appreciated my work. That I was able to say, okay, financially, I can take the jump and try to build subscribers. I've been at it, as you say, almost a year now, and I'm almost paying myself what I would have made in my previous job. So I'm
Well,
on a
there you go. That is a success story. But and some of the legacy media people are on this story now and corroborating what you've been doing. Your friends at the Globe and Mail.
that I'm happy that you put it that way. that global news and my investigations that started in Vancouver were first.
Yeah.
In a way, I feel like I came from the outside and kind of got a big story because I've been working on those deeper networks for a while. And I'm proud of the work that we did at Global News. And I'll tell you, Pamela, it's not easy. If you're not Bob Fife in the Globe and Mail, you're going to get even more pushback from the Prime Minister's office. And I do think that Global News withstood a lot of pressure. And then the Globe and Mail did get into the game and did a lot of important reporting, and other media now too. Now we
Yeah.
have ATIPs coming to the surface and the
Right.
Hope Commission, and now all the reporting is being affirmed. And as I say, I just think, not to use a cliche, but it does go a lot deeper. And so that's why I can tell you, I've got stories that I think will help the commission's second phase.
Yeah. You surprised me a bit, but not really in thinking about it for a moment, that you really you you appreciate the work that the Hogue Commission is doing and that is continuing to do. And I think we all are pleased that that effort is there. What about the legislation? I mean, the US has had a foreign registry since 1938, Australia 2018, UK last year. I mean, we are a bit late to the party, as we started saying, but some of these other bits, I mean, there's concerns that the legislation might be too broad and prevent protests and gatherings of people, but by and large, do you think it's right direction?
I That's a great question. I see it in the same way that I see the Hogue Commission. I could have been, very doubtful and skeptical that, a little bit of the truth would surface for Justice Hogue, and I believe it has. As I say, I believe there's a lot more to this story.
Yeah, for sure.
Same thing with the suite of interference tools. My sources indicated that Canada had these ready to go years ago, really. And, it wasn't a big leap to say that we should do the same as Australia, the United Kingdom, right? Taiwan. We can learn a lot from Taiwan. And so I do think it's a good start. I won't be negative at all. I think it's a great start. But, Kenny Chu, Senator Hazakis have been ready with a foreign agent registry for a long time.
Right.
And I really think the answer here is, if we turn our mind to why the government wouldn't want to put that in place, it just makes sense. Look at what happened to Kenny Chu. So, right, it may be that China favors, a party that's apparently friendlier to them, but that can change if that party takes strong measures. So I think it'll always be a challenge that we put something in place that protects our democracy, that finds the right balance and isn't watered down. Because I'll end my answer here. I mean, recent charges in the UK Parliament indicate that staffers that would appear to be, a little bit hawkish on China were in fact allegedly being used by China. So it shows the sophistication that could even get into the making of laws.
I also will just end on this kind of prairie girl statement, but we have a lot of debate in this country about a gun registry. And what we always say is the bad guys don't register their guns. They're illegal. So I kind of have the same reaction, I've got to admit, to a foreign registry for foreign operatives. Are the ones that are really doing the dirty work actually going to register?
That's totally right. And I'll say my dad's from Swift Current, Saskatchewan.
There you go.
So I'm going to mesh with you on that one. But I mean, I see two sides of that. First of all, it's totally true. In Australia, they're finding that most of the proxies aren't registering. And yet legally, if you have that tool, as we see in the United States, these people that have been prosecuted in these fox hunt stations, one of every time the foreign agent registry is used, you didn't sign up, and yet we can prove you're working for China. So for police, it'll be helpful.
All right. Well, that makes me feel better because it's one tool, but there will always be spies operating, and I think we just have to acknowledge that and grow up in terms of our response.
We need to grow up, and we have a lot of great investigators that I say are ready to clear the crease if our goalie's being run over.
Yeah, that's
they need some tools.
Very good analogy. Sam, really nice to meet you and have this conversation. I've been watching your work for a long time, and thank you for your courage and willingness to do this.
Thanks. It's an honor to meet you. And I didn't want to end before saying, as a young journalist, and even before that, I admired your interview with Pierre Elliott Trudeau.
Yeah, I'm really old. I go back to Dad.
Well, I studied your conversation there, so that's good stuff.
That's great, Sam. Sam Cooper, investigative journalist, founder of the Bureau.news. It's on Substack, and the author of a book called Willful Blindness, published in 21, but you also did an update to it as well, right?
I did an update chapter specifically, I would say, foreshadowing the election interference story.
Yeah, you sure did. Thanks again for the conversation, Sam.
It was
Cooper.
great. Thank you.
That's great. And that is it for No Nonsense with Pamela Wallin. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you soon.